3 identical faces, 3 different destinies, and a crown that had already chosen its owner before the ceremony began. In the Kingdom of Kadjara, the most dangerous lies are told by mirrors, and the most important truths are written in the mud on a woman's hands. The story begins on the morning of King Solomon's royal trial. The 3 triplets of Mbala are so alike that the palace messenger has to check his scroll 3 times before he can address them individually. While Zara applies pink powder and Jennifer adjusts her red sash, Jessica is found in the yard mending a neighbor's torn dress without being asked. The intro establishes Jessica's fatal flaw, self-sacrificial silence. She is so accustomed to serving from the shadows that she has almost forgotten she is also standing in the room. The sunlight in Mbala was a fickle thing, filtering through the acacia trees to cast long, dancing shadows across the sisters' shared porch. To the casual observer, they were a single soul split into 3 vessels, but as the morning heat rose, the colors they chose to wear acted as a silent language of their intentions. Zara was a vision in shimmering pink, the silk whispering against her skin as she preened, her every movement a calculated rehearsal for a life she felt she was born to lead. Jennifer, draped in a sash of defiant crimson, paced the boards like a caged predator, her eyes sharp and hungry for a world larger than a merchant's house. Then there was Jessica. She sat on a low stool in the corner of the yard, enveloped in a faded blue wrap the color of a tired sky. Her head was bowed over a neighbor's tattered hem, her fingers moving with a rhythmic, quiet grace. She didn't look up when the village children ran past, nor when her sister's laughter grew sharp with sibling rivalry. To Jessica, the world was something to be mended, not conquered. She existed in the pauses of their conversation, the invisible thread that held the fabric of their lives together, unaware that her habit of disappearing into the needs of others was the very thing that made her ghost-like in her own home. The thunder of hoofs shattered the morning's domesticity, signaling the arrival of the king's messenger. He looked at the 3 young women, 3 identical faces with 3 vastly different gazes, and felt a prickle of unease. By the decree of King Solomon, he announced, his voice echoing against the mud brick walls, the triplets of Mbala are to present themselves at the palace. The king seeks a queen of virtue, and the gates of Kadjara are open to you for 5 days of trial. Zara's hands flew to her hair, her mind already calculating which jewels would best catch the light of the throne room. Jennifer's posture straightened, a smirk playing on her lips as she envisioned the power of a crown. But Jessica simply looked down at the needle in her hand, the silver glinting in the sun. The thought of a palace felt cold, a vast space where she would only be further lost in the shadows of her sister's radiance. She felt the weight of their gaze, the expectation that she would be the one to pack their trunks and iron their silks, and she accepted it without a word, her heart beating a slow, steady rhythm of dread. The market of Kadjara was a chaotic sea of voices and scents, but amidst the crowd, an old man sat on a crate, his face partially obscured by a dusty turban. He watched as the triplets moved through the stalls. Zara stepped delicately, her pink skirts lifted high to avoid the grime, her nose crinkled in distaste at the smell of raw fish and sweat. Jennifer walked ahead, her red sash a streak of fire, pushing through the throng with a sense of entitlement that made the vendors draw back. Neither of them noticed when an elderly woman, her back bent under a heavy basket of yams, stumbled on a loose stone. The woman fell with a soft cry, her produce spilling into the filth. Zara moved past with a shudder, complaining about the lack of order in the city. Jennifer didn't even turn her head. But Jessica, trailing behind with the sisters' bags, dropped everything. She was on her knees in the dirt before the old woman could even gasp. With soft, murmuring words of comfort, Jessica gathered the bruised yams, wiped the mud from the woman's shaking hands, and offered her own shoulder as a brace. From his crate, the hooded man watched Jessica's blue wrap go grey with dust, his eyes lingering on the way she didn't check to see who was watching. The second trial was a test of service. Under the great baobab, the sisters were tasked with serving a communal meal to the village elders and the wandering poor. Zara's smile was a brittle mask as she handed out bowls, her movements jerky and resentful. "My hands were not meant for ladling stew," she whispered to Jennifer, her eyes darting to the palace guards to see if they noticed her grace. She made sure to stand where the sun hit her best, turning a moment of charity into a staged performance of beauty. It's moments like these that remind us how far a person is willing to go for a dream, and perhaps, why we choose to follow those who walk a path of quiet truth. If you found a piece of yourself in this journey so far, perhaps staying for the rest of the story is the only way to see where the heart truly leads. It would be an honor to have you with us as we continue. Jessica didn't stand in the light. She found the people who were too ashamed to approach the main table, the ones at the very edges of the crowd. She remembered their names from the morning introductions, asking after a grandson's fever or a harvest yield. She didn't just serve food, she served dignity, her blue dress stained with broth, her voice a low hum of genuine connection that made the palace walls seem, for a moment, like they were made of nothing but air. Inside the palace kitchens, the heat was a physical weight. A man in a grease-stained apron, his face smudged with soot, tended the fires as the sisters were brought in to prepare the evening's bread. Jennifer took charge with a sharp tongue, barking orders at the kitchen staff as if she already wore the signet ring. When a young scullery boy accidentally dropped a tray of flour near her, she didn't see a child, she saw an inconvenience. She humiliated him with a barrage of insults that left the boy trembling. The sustained cook watched from the shadows of the hearth. He saw Jennifer's red sash flare like an angry wound. Then he saw Jessica. She had moved to the boy's side without a word. She didn't yell, and she didn't scold. She simply took the broom from his hand and began to sweep, showing him the proper rhythm, her voice a calm anchor in Jennifer's storm. She even shared a small piece of the dough she was kneading, a secret gift to stop his tears. The cook turned back to the fire, the orange glow reflecting a knowing smile that Jennifer was too busy shouting to see. On the fourth night, the sky over Kadjara turned the color of a bruised plum. A supernatural wind began to howl, tearing at the thatch of the village huts and sent the palace banner snapping like whip cracks. It was a tempest that felt intentional, a scream from the earth itself. Zara bolted the heavy oak doors of her guest suite, huddled under silk sheets with a cloth over her eyes, terrified that the wind would ruin the glow of her skin. Jennifer paced her room, cursing the weather for delaying her final triumph, her red sash discarded on the floor. Outside, the world was dissolving into rain and chaos. The village silos were failing, and the cries of the farmers rose above the thunder. In the safety of the palace, Zara and Jennifer found comfort in stone walls and candlelight, convinced that the trial had been suspended. They didn't notice the empty bed in the room they shared. They didn't see the blue wrap, now dark and heavy with water, vanishing into the mouth of the storm. In the heart of the deluge, the mud was a hungry thing, pulling at the boots of the men trying to save the grain. Among them was a simple peasant, his frame strained as he hauled a fallen beam. The rain blinded him, the cold numbing his grip. Just as his strength began to falter, a pair of hands joined his. They were smaller, but they were steady. Jessica didn't say a word, she couldn't have been hard over the gale anyway. She simply leaned her weight against the wood, her feet sinking deep into the mire. They walked for hours in a rhythmic silence, two shadows against the wrath of the sky. When the beam was secure and the grain was covered, they slumped against the wall of the granary, shivering and caked in grey filth. Jessica looked at the peasant, the man she had labored beside, and saw only a tired soul. She reached out, her hands caked in the earth of the kingdom, and wiped a streak of mud from his forehead with the edge of her wet sleeve. It was a gesture of such profound equality and kindness that the man froze, his breath hitching in the dark. The morning of the wedding broke with a deceptive, scrub-clean stillness. The palace was a hive of activity, but the atmosphere was thick with a new kind of tension. Zara had spent the dawn hours in a frantic bath of milk and rose petals, her pink gown replaced by a dress of blinding white gold, her face painted to a porcelain perfection. Jennifer, too, had traded her red for royal ivory, her eyes burning with a secret, manipulative fire. They had seen the king's shadow in the hallway and convinced themselves that the trial was a formality, that the man they had ignored was not the man who would judge them. The ceremony began with a flourish of trumpets. King Solomon stood at the altar, his back to the assembly. Zara stepped forward, then Jennifer, both claiming the spot of the chosen bride, their identical faces a challenge to the court. "I am your queen," Zara whispered, her voice honeyed and false. No, it is I, Jennifer countered, her gaze sharp. They looked like goddesses, perfect and untouched by the world's great. But at the very back of the hall, near the heavy doors, stood a third woman. She wore no gold. She had no paint. Her blue dress was stained, and her hands were tucked into her sleeves, hiding the broken nails and the deep-seated dirt of the night before. The king turned. The court gasped as the royal robes fell away to reveal the simple tunic of the peasant from the granary, the same face as the merchant from the market and the cook from the hearth. Solomon's gaze didn't linger on the two women in white gold. He walked past them, the silence in the hall so heavy it felt like it might shatter. He stopped in front of Jessica. A mirror can tell you who is the most beautiful, Solomon said, his voice carrying to every corner of the room. But only the earth knows who is the most faithful. He reached out and took Jessica's hands, pulling them from her sleeves. He held them up for the court to see, the dirt under her nails, the raw scratches from the grain beams, the stains of the kingdom's survival. These are not the hands of a maid, he declared, his voice thick with an emotion that moved the room to tears. These are the hands of a queen who was willing to drown so her people could breathe. The gold crowns remained on their velvet cushions. King Solomon reached instead for a simple wreath of blue wildflowers, the kind that Jessica had mended and protected in the village fields. As he placed it upon her head, the kingdom of Kadjara erupted not with the formal cheers of a coronation, but with the roar of a people who finally felt seen. Zara and Jennifer stood frozen, their ivory silks feeling suddenly heavy and cold, the weight of their own vanity finally sinking in as they watched the sister they had tried to erase become the heart of the nation. Before the final feast began, Jessica stood on the balcony, looking out over the village she had helped save. The sun was setting, casting a warm, golden light over the mud brick walls and the acacia trees. She realized then that her silence hadn't been a flaw, but a reservoir of strength, a quiet power that had finally found its voice not in words, but in action. She wasn't just standing in the room anymore, she was the room. And as Solomon took her hand, the kingdom of Kadjara began its true reign, led by a woman who knew that the greatest treasures are always found in the service of others. Thank you for walking this path with us. If this story has touched your heart, perhaps sharing it with another soul is the final mend it needs.